The message popped up right after my meeting ended. I was still rubbing my eyes when I looked at my phone and saw the text from my mother. "We've changed the locks. You don't have a home anymore." I read it 3 times. I blinked, like maybe the words would rearrange themselves into something more rational, but they didn't. I stared at the screen as if it had betrayed me. The office was quiet, the kind of dead silence that only exists after hours. My heart wasn't pounding. It was just hollow. I texted back without thinking. "Real brave. Let's see who gets the last laugh." I wasn't sure who I was trying to scare, her or myself. By the time I stepped out of the building, the sun was already sliding behind the buildings, casting everything in a washed-out orange glow. I sat in the car and didn't start it. Just sat, staring, breathing, not crying. Not yet. My husband Eric didn't pick up when I called, so I drove home in silence. The kind of silence that thickens with every mile until it wraps around your neck like rope. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw our porch light on. That gave me hope for a moment. Maybe he'd make space for me. Just this once. But the front door opened before I even stepped out of the car, and there he was, holding a cardboard box in both hands. "You left these in the bedroom," he said. I stepped forward, confused. "Eric, wait. What is this?" "I just got a message from my mom. They locked me out." "I know," he interrupted, voice calm. Too calm. "I spoke to Spencer." My chest tightened. "You called him?" He nodded, then set the box down beside the steps. "I've been thinking about this for a while. Julia, you don't fight for yourself. Not with your brother. Not at work. Not even with your parents." "Eric, that's not fair, isn't it?" he snapped. "You let Spencer walk all over you your entire life. They gave him everything. And you just sat there." My voice cracked. What was I supposed to do? Tear the will in half? Set the house on fire? He looked at me, eyes flat. "You were supposed to stand up, but you didn't, and I can't keep pretending I respect that. You can come back when you prove you're capable of doing something. Anything." I stood there frozen, watching him close the door. That's when it hit me. I wasn't just locked out of my parents' house. I was being locked out of every place I ever thought I belonged. And I had no one to blame but myself. I didn't cry. I packed a few things from the box, tossed them into the car, and drove. I didn't know where I was going yet. But I knew where I wasn't going. Back. The highway stretched endlessly ahead of me, dark and quiet, as if the world had gone mute just to let me think. Except thinking hurt. Every memory, every word Eric had said, kept circling like vultures. You let them walk all over you. Maybe he was right. Maybe I had spent my whole life letting things happen to me instead of making them happen for me. I passed the state line around midnight. There was no sign, no flashing lights to announce I had left Nebraska behind. Just more silence, more sky. I should have been scared, driving alone through the empty plains. But all I felt was numb. Numb and strangely free. It had been decades since I last thought about Montana. My grandfather had died when I was a child. I barely remembered his voice, only that he smelled like smoke and pine, and that he used to hum songs I never understood. My parents never talked about him, and when I asked, they always gave the same vague answers. He was different. Old ways. Doesn't matter now. But it did matter. Because somehow, in the middle of my exile, I'd been handed a set of rusty keys to a house no one mentioned in years. It was like being given a clue in a story I didn't know I was part of. I stopped once at a gas station just outside Billings. The woman at the register looked me up and down as I paid for coffee and trail mix. "You headed north?" she asked. I nodded. "Storm coming that way," she said. "Best not linger too long." I didn't answer. I didn't tell her that a storm had already hit, and it had nothing to do with clouds. By the time I turned onto the gravel road leading into Coldwater, the sun was bleeding out behind the mountains. Everything looked soft, surreal. And then I saw it. The house. It stood alone at the edge of a sloping hill, tucked beneath the thick arms of pine trees. The wood siding had grayed with age. Half the shutters dangled crookedly from their hinges. Vines curled up along the porch rails like nature was trying to pull the whole thing back into the earth. One window was cracked. The roof sagged on one side, but it was real. It was mine, and something about it made me stop breathing for a moment. This wasn't just a house. It was a question, one I didn't have the answer to yet. I parked the car, grabbed my coat, and stepped out. The wind smelled like pine and damp leaves. I walked up to the porch slowly, the wooden planks creaking under my boots. My fingers closed around the key. It felt heavier than it should, like it had waited a long time to be used again. I stared at the door, and for the first time in days I didn't feel numb. I felt like something was waiting on the other side. The key turned, but not without protest. I had to shove the door with my shoulder until it gave way, groaning like something had just awakened from a long sleep. The air inside hit me like a wave, thick with dust, damp wood, and a trace of something older, like time itself had been fermenting in these walls. I stepped inside, my boots crunching on loose debris. Shafts of fading light slanted through the broken blinds, painting long shadows on the warped floorboards. There was no electricity, no sound, just the whisper of the wind sneaking through cracks in the roof. There was an old table in the center of the room, still standing despite everything. An ash-stained fireplace on the far wall. Cobwebs dressed every corner like veils. This place hadn't been lived in, it had been abandoned. But as I stood there, scanning the room with my flashlight, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something had been waiting for me. I moved slowly through the house, past the tiny kitchen with its rusted sink and mold-streaked cabinets, down a narrow hallway that led to 3 small rooms. The first 2 were empty, save for broken furniture and an unsettling silence. But the third, it stopped me cold. The door was solid oak, darker than the others. Its surface was carved with strange, swirling patterns, lines that twisted into eagle-wing suns and what looked like a river that flowed across the wood. I ran my fingers over it. The carving was old, but not worn. Preserved. Intentional. I tried the key. It didn't fit. I tried all 3 keys. Nothing. Frustration simmered beneath my ribs. But it wasn't just about the lock. This door didn't belong in a place like this. It was too deliberate, too sacred. It was hiding something. I crouched to inspect the base and saw it, a loose panel just beside the frame, half hidden by dust. I pulled gently. It gave way, revealing a narrow crawl space behind it, barely wide enough for me to fit through. I hesitated, then crawled in. The air inside was colder. The flashlight flickered as I moved forward, heart pounding. And then the space opened up into a small hidden room, no bigger than a walk-in closet, but packed with presents. Shelves lined the walls, filled with things that didn't belong to this century. Pottery vases with intricate patterns, bundles of woven cloth, hides embroidered with bold, colorful threads. In the corner stood an eagle feather headdress, so pristine it looked untouched by time. But what drew me most was the chest. It was carved from dark wood, with the image of a wolf howling beneath a full moon. I knelt beside it, fingers trembling as I lifted the heavy lid. Inside lay a leather-bound book. Thick, old, sacred. The first page bore a single sentence, written in careful, slanted handwriting. To those who carry the blood of the Lakota, preserve and cherish. Below it was a name I hadn't heard spoken in years. Joseph Anderson, my grandfather. I sat on the cold floor, the book resting in my lap like a sleeping animal I was afraid to wake. The pages were yellowed, but the ink was clear, each line written with care, like every word had been weighed before it was set down. My grandfather had written a record, not just of his life, but of a world I had never been allowed to see. He wrote about Wakantanka, his father, my great-grandfather, a Lakota warrior who had once lived on the open plains, hunting buffalo and dancing beneath stars. He wrote of ceremonies, of songs, of language passed down in whispers, hidden from the world that had tried to erase them. of the soldiers who came, the land that was taken, and the traditions that were driven underground. But woven through all the pain was something else, something fierce. Resilience. Joseph had chosen to preserve what little he had left. He hid these artifacts when museums came calling. He taught what he could quietly, carefully. But most of all, he waited for someone who would find it again and carry it forward. I didn't know I'd been waiting for anything until that moment. But reading his words, I felt something inside me shift. All my life, I'd been told to keep the peace, not to stir things up, not to ask questions that couldn't be answered. Now the answers were here, in my hands. I spent hours in that room, carefully lifting each object, studying the texture of the hides, the stitching of the beads, the smooth surface of the pottery. Everything was made by hand. Everything had meaning. There was a drum tucked beneath the bottom shelf, its skin taut despite the years. I tapped it once, gently. The sound echoed like a heartbeat through the room. I didn't know if these things had monetary value, but I knew they were priceless, not because of what they could buy, but because of what they remembered. They were pieces of a story I had never been told, and now it was mine to carry. At dawn, I stepped outside, blinking into the soft pink light rising over the mountains. The air was thin, clean. I hadn't slept, but I didn't feel tired. I felt awakened. I took the book with me, back to the main room, and set it on the old table like an offering. This house had been meant for forgetting, but I wasn't going to forget anymore. I pulled out my phone and stared at Tom's number for a long moment. He was an archaeologist I hadn't spoken to in years, a friend from college who once told me, "Sometimes history hides in the places we abandon." I hit call. When he answered, I didn't even say hello. "I found something," I said, "and I think it's bigger than I am." Tom arrived the next afternoon, dusty from the drive and wide-eyed the moment he stepped through the door. I led him to the hidden room, barely speaking. Some things didn't need introductions. The moment he saw the headdress, he stopped breathing. "Julia," he whispered, voice shaking. "Do you know what you're sitting on?" I didn't answer. I just watched him move through the room like a child stepping into a sacred place. His hands didn't touch anything at first. He just looked. Then, finally, he crouched beside the chest and opened it slowly. This isn't just valuable. This is irreplaceable. These artifacts, he looked up, eyes wide, they're not just cultural. They're spiritual. This could be worth millions. I nodded slowly. "I know. But that's not what matters, is it?" he said. I shook my head. No, before he left, he told me he'd reach out to a native cultural expert. "Someone who can guide you better than I can," he said. "This isn't just about preservation, Julia. It's about legacy." 2 days later, a man knocked on my door just after sunrise. He stood tall and still against the backdrop of mist-covered trees. He looked older than time, his long silver braid tied neatly down his back, eyes sharp like flint. "Samuel Black Elk," he said simply. "Tom sent me." I stepped aside, letting him in without a word. Somehow I already knew who he was. Or maybe I just knew what he represented. When he entered the hidden room, something shifted. The air itself seemed to settle. Samuel walked slowly, reverently. He ran his fingers over the pottery, touched the edge of the headdress, then turned to me. "Do you know what this is?" he asked. I nodded. "My grandfather's legacy." He paused, then said, "No. It's your tribe's spirit. These objects, these stories, they're not decorations. They are memories, and they've waited long to be remembered." I swallowed hard. "Why me?" Samuel tilted his head slightly. "Because your grandfather believed someone would come. Someone who carried the blood, but also the heart. And you found them, didn't you? Without a map, without a guide." I didn't know what to say. I had never thought of myself as brave, just tired of being invisible. "You are the bridge," he said, "between what was lost and what can still be saved." His words settled into my bones like truth I'd known all along, but had been too afraid to name. I looked around the room. at the feathers, the patterns, the stories woven into hide and clay. And for the first time in my life, I felt chosen, not because someone picked me, but because I answered. I thought the hardest part was over, that maybe now, surrounded by pine and silence and memory, I could finally begin again. But peace is never quiet for long. Spencer showed up without warning. His SUV crunched the gravel as it pulled up to the front of the house, too polished, too clean for this place. He stepped out in a designer jacket, sunglasses still on despite the cloudy sky. I stood on the porch, arms crossed, heart already sinking. "Julia," he called, spreading his arms like we were old friends. "Heard you found treasure." I didn't answer, just waited. He climbed the steps, smiled that smile I'd seen all my life, half charm, half threat. "I mean, seriously. You, in the woods, guarding ancient relics? Didn't see that one coming. What do you want, Spencer?" He shrugged. "To talk. To offer something fair." I raised an eyebrow. "Sell the stuff," he said like it was obvious. "Or at least split it. I'll trade you the Lincoln house. Clean deal. You get comfort, I get cash. Win-win." I stared at him. This isn't a negotiation. He laughed loud and sharp. "Come on. Be reasonable. These things. Museums will eat them up. We're talking millions. They're not for sale." His smile cracked. "You're still the same. Always clinging to principle while the world passes you by. This is why you never got ahead. You think morals feed you? Wake up." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The stillness behind me, the weight of the house, answered for me. He shook his head, gave a low whistle, and walked back toward his car. "You'll regret this," he called over his shoulder. "You always regret being weak." That night, Eric called. His voice had changed. Not cold, warm, almost nostalgic. Like the man I met years ago, the one who used to leave notes on my dashboard and kiss my forehead while I worked late. "I heard from Spencer," he said, "about what you found." Silence. "Julia, is it true?" I hesitated. "Yes, but it's not what you think. It's not treasure." He chuckled softly. "No, because treasure can buy us out of the mortgage. It can buy freedom. Don't you want that? A new life? Together." I closed my eyes. "I don't need a new life," I said quietly. "I'm building one." His tone shifted. "You're being ridiculous. Sitting in that moldy shack with bones and feathers like you're a shaman or something. They're not bones and feathers," I said sharply. "They're history, and I won't sell them for comfort." "Julia!" "No," I said, cutting him off. "You left, like they did, and I'm done begging to be kept." For a moment, all I heard was static. Then his voice, flat and clipped. "Suit yourself." The line went dead, and for the first time, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt free. I didn't hear from Spencer or Eric again for a while, and I didn't need to. The silence was a gift. For once, I had space to think and to act. The idea came slowly, like mist rolling in from the trees. These artifacts weren't meant to be hidden. Not behind museum glass, not buried in legal files, or sold to the highest bidder. They were meant to live. So I made a decision. I would restore the house, not just to live in it, but to open it, to let the stories breathe again. The first person I told was Samuel. He stood beside the headdress, nodding quietly as I spoke. "You're on the right path," he said, "but you can't walk it alone." He introduced me to others, elders, artisans, teachers, people who still carried the songs and skills passed down by whispers. Rose White Deer was a weaver with gentle eyes and calloused hands. Thomas Redhawk could summon entire ceremonies with his voice alone. They didn't treat me like an outsider. They treated me like someone who had finally come home. We made plans. The house would become a living cultural center, part archive, part classroom, part sacred space. We'd display the artifacts, but also teach. Lakota language classes, traditional weaving, story circles for the children, I poured my savings into buying supplies, and the community brought tools, wood, paint, hands. Each day the house grew stronger, as if it could feel our intentions repairing it from the inside out. I learned to patch walls, to seal old windows, to scrub years of silence from the floorboards. My hands blistered, my back ached, but I had never felt more alive. And then, just as everything began to take shape, it came. A letter, folded neatly, delivered to my doorstep in an unmarked envelope. It was from Spencer's lawyer. He was suing me, claiming co-ownership of the house, arguing that our parents' will was ambiguous, that I had misrepresented the contents found on the property, that I was unfit to handle items of cultural value. My hands trembled as I read, not from fear, but from fury. I had expected greed, but this was erasure. Again, just like history had done to our ancestors. He wasn't just trying to take the house. He was trying to rewrite the story. I called Samuel. He came immediately, a thermos of tea in one hand, calm in the other. "He's scared," Samuel said, settling into the chair across from me. "Greed always is when it sees something it can't control." I nodded slowly. "I'm going to fight." "Then fight with honor," he said. "You're not just protecting a house. You're protecting memory." That night, I stayed up late, rereading my grandfather's journal. I traced the ink with my fingers, whispering the names I'd never heard spoken aloud before. And I promised them I wouldn't let this happen again. The courthouse in Billings was quiet the morning of the trial, the kind of quiet that feels like a held breath before a storm. I wore a simple black dress, my grandfather's book tucked beneath my arm like armor. Spencer was already there, seated across the aisle in a gray suit that probably cost more than everything I owned. He didn't look at me, just scrolled his phone like this was a business meeting. But I knew better. This wasn't business. This was blood. The judge was an older woman, stern face, sharp eyes that missed nothing. She asked questions efficiently, reviewed the will, listened to the legal arguments with the patience of someone who had seen too many families tear each other apart for less. Then it was my turn. I stood, legs shaking but voice steady. "I didn't come here to take anything from anyone," I said. "I didn't ask for this house. I didn't know what it held. But once I saw what was inside, I couldn't ignore it." I held up the book. This journal belonged to my grandfather, Joseph Anderson. He documented the history of our Lakota lineage, ceremonies, memories, teachings. Alongside that were artifacts he preserved to protect from being stolen, sold, or forgotten. He hid them so that one day someone in our bloodline could continue what he started. I paused. The room was still. This isn't about value, not the kind Spencer's talking about. This is about meaning, about restoring a culture that has been silenced for generations. I'm not keeping these things for myself. I've opened a cultural center. I'm working with tribal elders. I'm teaching children where they come from. This isn't property. It's legacy. I looked at the judge. I'm not doing this for money. I'm doing it because no one else did. And if I don't, it all disappears. Spencer's lawyer tried to counter, talking about market value, potential mismanagement, equitable distribution. Spencer finally spoke, cool, confident, practiced. "She's being emotional," he said. "These items should be evaluated, sold properly. My parents wouldn't have wanted her to use family assets for personal projects." But he wasn't convincing. Not this time. The judge took her time before speaking. When she did, her voice was low but firm. "The will is clear," she said. "The house in Montana, along with all its contents, was left solely to Julia Anderson. Furthermore, her commitment to honoring cultural and ancestral legacy is not only valid, it is commendable." She looked directly at Spencer. "Not all inheritances are meant to be split. Some are meant to be carried." The gavel came down. I exhaled and realized I'd been holding my breath the whole time. Spencer stood, eyes hard, mouth drawn tight. For a second, I thought he'd say something. Apologize, maybe. But he didn't. He just walked out, leaving a trail of silence behind him. And I didn't chase it. I walked back to the car, the journal still warm in my hands. Not a victory I flaunted, but a truth I had finally lived out loud. The cultural center opened on a warm summer morning, the kind where the breeze carries stories instead of dust. We lit sage bundles, let the drums echo through the pine trees, and sang the old songs. Songs I still didn't know all the words to, but sang anyway, because the rhythm had already rooted itself inside me. Samuel stood beside me in his embroidered vest, holding a ceremonial staff. Rose White Deer wore a crimson shawl she'd woven just for this day. Thomas Redhawk opened the ceremony with a prayer that made the wind pause to listen. I wasn't at the front. I didn't need to be. I stood off to the side, watching children run barefoot across the grass, their laughter mixing with the songs of our ancestors. After the ceremony, a girl no older than 10 approached me. Her black hair was braided, her necklace hand-beaded with suns and eagles. She held something behind her back, shy but proud. "For you," she said, placing a small pouch in my hands. My grandma helped me make it. Inside was a simple leather necklace, a single bead at its center the color of earth. She looked up at me and smiled. "You're not just Julia Anderson anymore," she whispered. "You're Miss Julia Red Feather." My throat tightened. It wasn't a title. It was a homecoming. Later that evening, when the crowd had thinned and the sun dipped low behind the trees, I sat alone on the porch. The old boards no longer groaned beneath me. They felt solid, familiar, like they'd finally accepted me. I opened my grandfather's journal again, flipping to the last page. I had read it so many times I could recite the words from memory, but that night they landed differently. We do not inherit the land from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children. And so, we must leave them more than soil, we must leave them soul. I closed the book slowly, pressing it to my chest. Somewhere in the trees, an owl called. In the distance, smoke curled from the sacred fire, still smoldering behind the house. And above me, the stars blinked to life, clearer here than anywhere I'd ever been. I touched the necklace the little girl had given me. It was warm. I wasn't rich. I wasn't praised in magazines or headlines. But children now knew words their grandparents had feared to say aloud. Elders no longer sat in silence. And every drumbeat that rose from this land was a refusal to forget. This wasn't just revenge. It was restoration. It was me rewriting what had been erased. I was no longer the quiet daughter, the dismissed sister, the discarded wife. I was Julia Red Feather, descendant of Wakantanka, and I had finally come home.